Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, June 1st, and this is the weekly market update. As always, the disclaimer, anything that you hear or see on this podcast or video is not to be taken as investment advice. I am not a registered financial advisor. I cannot give you personal financial advice. Everything presented here is for informational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence. It's your money. It's your responsibility. Okay, let's get into the slides. So this is something that I have pointed out in the past, others have. Basically, because of the price rises and the embedded inflation we've had and prices going up, 15, 20, 30%, just even for basic necessities, people's incomes have not kept up. And so I think one of the things that has happened is the fact that people have resorted to using credit cards, if they have them, to try and maintain their lifestyle, or in some cases even live. You see the videos, the anecdotal videos on TikTok or Twitter or X. Somebody, usually some young lady, sitting in her car crying or complaining about the prices. I don't say it flippantly, it's a fact. I mean, we have, again, this bifurcation that I've said before in the population, where if you are an asset holder, if you have cash, I mean, think about it. If you were getting, if you had $5 million, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, you were only getting about $25,000 in, very little money in any kind of risk-free treasury or T-bills. Now you can get $250,000 a year in interest. So again, that Cantillon effect is, you just sit there and clip coupons and make $250,000 a year. If you have cash, if you have assets in the financial markets, you've benefited, right? If you have nothing, if you're living hand to mouth, you're suffering. And so I think, this is only going to go on as long as it can go on. You have to wonder how many people are out there hungry, how many people are out there truly suffering, how many people, old people, are having to forego purchasing medication so they can get, a can of soup or something. This is what's really happening. And it all goes back to this fake, phony monetary system that benefits a small group of people. And this is why, it doesn't matter of ranting and raving and going out into the street and screaming at the moon and doing more. It doesn't matter. This is the system. And this is why I say you've got to put together a bankroll and you have to be a player. Because if you don't, this is going to get worse over time. It's not going to get better, okay? Because I don't see anybody, except for maybe a couple people that are policymakers, that have any prescription except for to spend more money. Both the presidential candidates are both MMTers. They're just going to spend more money just on different things. And this Congress just goes along with it, okay? Because they all want to spend money. And so this is, a deeper thing about than going in and voting for someone. This is a lack of values and morals and ethics that permeates all of society, in my view. And so the other thing you have to wonder about is, at what point does this explode socially? Okay, you see more and more younger people understanding that they're not going to be able to participate in the so-called American dream, if there ever was one, an American dream that's now turning into an American nightmare for many people. So you have to wonder how that's going to go. So again, I shut down. I mean, I'm not being hyperbole here. I'm back in South Texas, sleepy Harlingen, 30 miles north of the Mexican border, away from all major big cities and a lot of the weird stuff that happens. I got a feeling that this summer and into the fall is going to be very active, with protesting and social upheaval possibly in this country. So prepare for that, and prepare for the fact that going forward, I think what you're going to see is because of the dissatisfaction, because most people are dissatisfied one way or another. They don't like what's going on, or they don't like the choices being presented. They don't see any real leadership. Okay. So we're descending into this third world, mudslinging back and forth. And we'll get into that later in the political section. But long story short, you cannot have a society where fewer and fewer people are benefiting from the status quo and the majority are suffering. It's just not tenable long term. And I think this is a indication of that. And I think it's going to blow eventually. This is another thing. All you people that are out there flexing. I mean, I'm not saying people don't listen to this video, but there's a lot of people out there flexing, their car, their watch, and I would just be low key. They have a book called The Millionaire Next Door, talking about people that built businesses, and you would never know that the next door neighbor was a millionaire. That's the kind of attitude you need to adopt, because I think there's going to be a backlash against people. When people are suffering, they look outside themselves to blame other people. It's human nature, unfortunately. And so if you're out there flexing, you're going to get robbed and you're going to be set upon. So just, shake your head and smile. Yeah, that's terrible. And, for most people, it's probably best not to say anything. Just go about your business, right? Don't attract attention to yourself. I know that there's, a lot of people moving to more rural areas, areas that aren't in these what I call flash zones that can get set off if some criminal gets beat up by the cops or something. You just don't want to be around that. You don't want to get caught up in that, right? And be put in a situation where you're going to have to defend yourself, or be surrounded in a car and you make a snap decision in a panic or whatever, and you run somebody over or you shoot somebody, God forbid, when you're in a split second because you're fearing for your life and trying to protect your family. The next thing you know, your life is destroyed, and you just don't need that. So something to think about. I think this all kind of ties together. But yeah, this is a big deal. This is going to get worse. This will go on until it can't go on any longer. They'll start, people will start defaulting, and the credit card companies will start tightening down on credit, and then that will be choked off. And then I don't know what people are going to do then. So here's David Rosenberg. He's been wrong. I've been wrong about my recession call. I mean, things seem to be slowing down now finally, but we still have avoided this recession. I thought we would have a recession last year. David Rosenberg did too. But again, we're getting data points, that are showing us that have high levels of probability of forecasting recession. So here's one, for example. You have your Chicago PMI is at 35.4. Remember, anything less than 50 is contraction in the economy. Anything above 50 on a PMI is expansion. And so we're at 35.4. And so what I'd like to point out is that, what he says here in this tweet is Chicago PMI at 35.4 has been consistent with recession 100% of the time in the past. Those who threw in the towel on the call will be picking it up before too long, as they did in 1990, 2001, and 2008. And of course, 2020, which was a man-made event, but here's 2008. So you see the times in the past, going at least back to what this data set is pre-1970, that periods at this level of PMI, of the Chicago PMI, have been recessionary. And so, right now we still have everybody saying the economy is good. It's possible that we're already in a recession and people don't know it. So we'll see. I mean, again, there's so much money sloshing around. There's so much fiscal spending happening from the federal government. It may be masking this or smoke screening it, but something to keep in mind. Again, we're seeing that global liquidity surge. We've seen, like, even a couple banks in Europe. I think the Swiss National Bank. I think there was another bank that cut rates recently. But I think I've heard whispers around the Bank of Canada considering starting a rate cutting cycle, and even the ECB starting their rate cutting cycle. So we're heading for the bigger bazookas to be pulled out. Again, of course, the big bazooka, for U.S. investors is what's the Fed going to do? Again, we don't like talking about this. Is the reason why we talk about these things. It's like, okay, why do I care if the Fed's going to go into a rate cutting cycle, because typically on their rate cutting cycles, they're going to cut over the rate. When they do begin cutting, it's usually very rapid and very, very deep cuts. I mean, somewhere around 400 to 500 basis points. So you could get down to 1% on the Fed funds or back to the zero bound again, depending on how bad this recession is. And based just on this kind of data set, this isn't the only data set we should take into consideration, but you know, uh, we could be looking at a severe recession, 2008, 2000 levels. These were bad recessions, if you recall. So something to keep in mind. And we care because once they start the rate cutting cycle, we should see real rates reverse. We'll see the dollar weaken, and that's going to be very positive for commodities. I think in a context of the fact that you may have a dip for 6 months or a little bit longer, or a year maybe, in all financial assets, including commodities, just because the conditions that would cause the Fed to cut will be short-term negative, but eventually the liquidity wave will overwhelm that, and gold will benefit, emerging markets will benefit, and so something to keep in mind. I mean, you cannot forecast obviously with 100% certainty. All we can say is, in the past, what has happened when we've seen big rate cutting cycles from the big central banks, like the Fed, and typically the dollar weakens, emerging markets do better, commodities do better, gold does better. So we're already starting to see a lot of the commodities starting to react. Again, markets look ahead. So can you infer from some of the movements in gold and silver, for example, and some of the other things we've seen? Can we infer from that they're sniffing out the upcoming bazookas being fired? I think that case could be made. So here's a chart you've seen this probably floating around X and on the internet. Basically what you have here is the green is the CPI year over year from 1966 to 1982. And I've talked about this before. This was, I was born in 1967, but I was a young mug in the late 70s and early 80s, like pre-teen and teen. And I remember this vividly, what happened. Again, I've told the story before, I didn't really know anything because I was a young guy, 12 or 13, 14 years old. I didn't know anything about markets. What I observed from what the media that we had then, which was basically the Wall Street Journal that came every day, watching Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser, stuff like that. We didn't have CNBC. We didn't have the internet. And so I remember how we had this we had the initial inflation, and then it kind of was, went down, and then we had a surge in the late 70s, and up until when Reagan got elected. Then this was when Volcker, really clamped down or raised interest rates really high and clamped down inflation. Volcker gets all the credit, but I would also say that the Reagan deregulation had a lot to do with it too. There was a lot of deregulation that happened immediately that really, like on airline fares and a whole bunch of stuff. I should actually go back and look at that, but that had a big effect on, causing more competition and causing prices to come down. And I think you're seeing the reverse of that now. You're seeing overregulation. You're seeing the government stick its nose in more things that raises costs, raising minimum wages, all this stuff to $25 or $20. It's easy for a bureaucrat that knows nothing about nothing, or one of these politicians that has never done anything in their life, to just say, yeah, let's have a $20 minimum wage. Well, somebody has to pay for that. Well, the consumer, the business owner, is in business to make a profit, not create a social welfare workers Soviet where everybody gets along and we're all brothers. They're there to make money, and you're an employee, and if your value can't deliver what they're paying you, the value exceeding what you're being paid, they're going to get rid of employees. In this to make money, not lose money. And so prices go up if you have the government inserting itself in private transactions. And so you're seeing this is the same thing that happened like in the late 60s into the 70s with the Carter administration. You're seeing like history is kind of like doesn't repeat exactly, but it's rhyming. And obviously, when Reagan got elected, it was a massive blowout. I think the only states Jimmy Carter won were Minnesota, which is a liberal state, District of Columbia, which doesn't really vote, but it, has a congressman, and Hawaii. And I mean, most of the other states, I mean, maybe there's a few other ones I can't remember, but it was a real blowout, and people had had enough. Now the demographics of the country have changed markedly over the last 50 years, 40, 50 years. So you won't see that kind of blowout, but you're seeing the same kind of dissatisfaction. I am remembering and I am seeing the same type of dissatisfaction around this cost of living. Ultimately, they can sit there and cite statistics in the administration about low unemployment. People don't see it. They go to the grocery store. That's what their reference point is. Cost for their kids, cost for food, cost for house and auto insurance. Everywhere they look, medical insurance, medical costs, everything is exploding in price. Okay. And, most people, again, don't understand why it's happening. They just want somebody to do something about it. And so the person that has their hand on the tiller currently is the one that gets the blame. And so this is why you're seeing so many people. This is why Mr. Biden's in trouble with his reelection. Okay, even with the demography that's totally different than it was 40 years ago. I think my father, who was involved in politics in Minnesota for many, many years, he spent time with Hubert H. Humphrey, and we kind of joked back and forth when we were talking about the old days. The Hump said that in the end, when somebody goes into that ballot box or into that voting booth, they vote their wallet. Okay, they vote how they feel about the economy, how they personally feel about it. Okay, and how it's affecting them. And so all the other stuff is, when everybody's flush and everybody, is riding high on the hog and the economy's good and everybody's working and everybody's, like I said, has cash, people then start, caring about foreign policy or abortion or what have you. But, the majority of people, if they're not feeling good about their prospects economically or feeling secure or their wallet is light, that's what they care about. That's the number one issue. And so it's very possible many commentators and other analysts, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I think that I do have a bias towards, I mean, with the debts that we have in the West, particularly in the US and Western Europe, there's only one way out, and that's print money. I had a conversation, I was interviewed the other day, and I just keep pointing out to people, there's only three ways out of this debt problem. Okay. And there's only one that's actually possible. So you can, again, I've talked about this before, you can either pay off the debt. Well, that's not going to happen. I can't think of one instance in the history of any empire where they paid their debts off and everything was wonderful. You can just do an outright default and say, that's it, we're not paying, wipe the slate clean, but that would cause so much upheaval and turmoil. There would be like Bastille Day type French Revolution guillotines. Or you can do what most governments do, which is debase the currency over time, try to do it in a controlled manner so that the populace never figures out what you're doing, and steal people's energy, wealth, and time away from them, okay, via currency debasement. And that's what basically the United States did after World War II, when they had a very, very high debt to GDP ratio because of the spending that was done during World War II. They basically kept interest rates. They kept the inflation rate above interest rates. They used yield curve control, and they basically slowly but surely, got the debt to GDP ratio down because the economy will expand. I don't see it's possible. Anything's possible, but I just don't see the United States slipping into like a Argentinian or Turkey type hyperinflation. Anything's possible though. But I do think that over time, that's where we're heading. Maybe not in my lifetime, but we will see higher inflation. I mean, there's no way out of this. And again, I think that eventually, I've said this before, that's what you have to rig for. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be periods of disinflation or deflation during economic pullbacks, but the same playbook will be in effect. You're running now institutionalized $1 trillion plus deficits every year. And in a recession, you're going to have two, three, maybe even $4 trillion deficits because of the automatic spending that goes into effect during recessions for food stamps, unemployment, all these programs that are on autopilot. Notwithstanding the fact that 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring and going on Social Security and Medicare, which is not funded. And so, the easy way out for people is just just debase the currency. And so in that type of situation, you're back to the Cantillon effect. You gotta get as close to the money printing as you can and understand where that money's going to flow. Notwithstanding the fact that you do have to keep in your mind that this is a long-term secular trend, I think, of higher than what we're used to inflation and currency debasement, but there will be periods where punctuated with disinflations and economic weakness, and you'll have to react to those. But I think that this is why gold's done so well over the last 20 years, because it's already started and it's just going to accelerate, in my view. So it's possible that we could see this happen again, right? And but we don't have a Volcker. We don't have the situation. Our fiscal situation is a lot worse than it was back in 1979, 1980, and we don't have the space to maneuver that we had before. Again, here you go, right? $9.3 trillion in US debt has to be rolled within a year. Okay, well, a lot of this debt is at lower interest rates. I pointed that out when I looked at you can go look at the Congressional Budget Office's projections. They project, I think, by 2033 for the federal debt to be over $50 trillion. It's around 35 trillion now. It'll be 50 trillion by the end of this decade, more than likely, in my estimation. But anyway, but they assume an interest rate, a long-term interest rate of like 2.1%, where we're already at, high fours into the fives, 5% interest rate on T-bills or whatever, for whatever the 10 years at. And so you're rolling out of that lower cost debt, right? That was sold at, 0.25 or 1% or whatever it was, into this higher debt. So this is why interest rates or interest on the debt is going to keep expanding. This is, at some point, this is a problem. And is it actionable on Monday? No, but this is another reason why you really need to understand what has happened in the past in these type of situations and what asset classes have benefited. And we've talked about that before, basically hard assets. Buying things that the government can't, or the Federal Reserve can't just make ad infinitum. They can make currency units ad infinitum. They can make electronic entries into, whatever in their balance sheet, but they can't make more, Bordeaux wine. They can't make more. They can only, increase gold production in the world about 1% a year. They can only, there's only so much copper in the ground. So these are the things that, if you're going to expand the balance sheets, if you're going to print money, I was listening to Ronnie Stoffel the other day from Increment, however you say it, and In Gold We Trust. He was on Adam Taggart. I'll put the interview on the weekly email, and he was kind of pointing out, the amount of how big the balance sheet should grow over the next 5 to 10 years, and what the value of the new gold that's going to be mined and the new Bitcoin that's going to be mined, and the amount of currency printed is going to overwhelm, okay, the value of the gold and Bitcoin. So that's the point, right? Those things hold value. That's what happens when people, people are going to be drawn to those things as they begin to realize that this is out of control and it's not going to get fixed. People understand, they understand history. They begin to start looking at this. And because, with the advent of the internet, you have so many opinions out there, and this stuff isn't like just controlled by 3 network news's broadcasts at 6 o'clock every day. I mean, it's all over. It's out there. There's going to be no excuse for people not to know what happened. So again, sell, this is our mantra here. This is our guiding principle. This is our mission statement at Actionable Intelligence Alert. Sell over valuation, buy under valuation. So you've seen these charts. I put them up when they pop up. You see, this is somebody you should follow on X. Kobe SC Letter, really good charts, puts out good information. This is from Bank of America Global Research. Basically, this is the NASDAQ 100 versus commodities. And you see that we're at a level where historically tech is overvalued relative to commodities. And so what's overvalued? Tech. What's undervalued? Commodities. You saw what happened during the tech wreck. For you guys that are in your 20s, you probably weren't even born or just a young little kid. You don't remember. I remember this. A tremendous amount of money was made during this time. And to say things are different this time, it's never different this time. So I don't know if it's going to react the same way, if this is going to correct itself the same way, but I suggest to you that if you look to sell overvaluation and buy undervaluation over the long term, it's like reading a poker book about how to play hands. You know, if you get dealt in Hold'em, if you get dealt two aces to begin, if you play that hand one, you might get beat in any individual hand, but if you play that hand 10,000 times, it's going to come out to a certain percentage of wins, right? And so this is all about probabilities and pattern recognition. Okay, that doesn't give you 100% certainty, but it puts you, it has to go into your thinking. What's the probable outcome that tech continues to get more and more overvalued relative to commodities, which have been underinvested in now for almost 20 years? And where's the real opportunity? And that's what something like this tells you. It doesn't give you an exact date. It doesn't give you a timing signal. It doesn't give you a view of how big the move will be, although it could potentially repeat, but things are never exactly the same. But this is, to my mind, stark picture worth 1,000 words, shows you what the opportunity is. So Goldman Sachs, in quotes, 5D commodity bull market. Again, I show these things not to say, oh yeah, Goldman Sachs is bullish. Let's get on. I mean, these investment banks, they have ulterior motives. They're out there to, get assets under management and sell things and get commissions. So take that into consideration. But occasionally, a lot of times, they put out good research. They're research analysts, make good calls, and it's worth considering. But I thought this was interesting. So what do they say? They say we remain selectively bullish commodities because, number one, demand growth remains solid. Number two, we see more structural upside in industrial metals and gold. And three, oil's geopolitical risk premium has shrunk. We expect commodity total returns to rise from 13% year to date to 18%. And then they get into this 5D bull market trends will create structural opportunities commodities. The first D, disinvestment. Low investment in commodities induces select tightness. Yes, that's one of our views also. Decarbonization and climate change require higher prices to attract green capex. I think maybe the luster's coming off the decarbonization and green, but not fully. But that was going to be, EVs, that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is they say, okay, there's so many EVs in 2024, and by 2025, at the current combined annual growth rate, they're going to be this many and this much copper is needed, blah, blah, blah. So that doesn't really work out that way, right? It's fun to look at those and to see what's really happening, but you see that the bloom is starting to come off. The whole green energy, it's not going to go away because it's such a big industry now, and it has lobbyists, and just like every other big industry, it's going to be sopping things up, but I don't think it's going to be the growth, the push that it was originally going to be. But again, these were just add-ons because we already had just the normal growth that's needed in commodities just in this emerging global East and South. The third D, de-risking. Geopolitical de-risking and strategic restocking support demand for gold and critical commodities. Data centers and AI, maybe this is the new, to my mind, maybe the new EV thing or the new green energy. We'll have to see, but goes without saying. The data center thing has now come to the forefront. Support demand via power and higher incomes. And then defense spending, support demand for metals and distillate fuels. We expect copper to resume its sharp rally once finite stocks of cheaper substitutes deplete, with an additional 15% of upside to $12,000 a ton by near year end. We expect gold prices to rise 14% to $2,700 an ounce by year end on solid demand from emerging market central banks and Asian households. Yeah, that's kind of what we've been talking about. So there you go. That's Goldman Sachs 5D commodity bull market trends. Take it for what it is. I think I'm in agreement with probably 3 or 4 out of the 5. We'll see. So this was a chart that I saw on X, several people put up. It was chart of the week. Commodities outperforming so far in 2024. Here's your different asset classes since January 1st. Commodities, equities, US dollar, rates. So you see rates have gone up because of the inflationary impulse. That means prices for bonds and such have went down. I wouldn't, unless you're just buying short-term T-bills to have some place to place your cash, I would not be an investor in long-term bonds. I don't know why anybody with the fiscal situation of the U.S. and the trends that we've seen and the lack of responsibility and accountability would want to hold bonds in a portfolio. I think that 60-40 equities bonds portfolio needs to be seriously looked at, and people need to really, in my view, think about reducing their bond holdings and look to replace to a certain extent with commodities. Because I think this is just for this year, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue, but I thought, how many people knew that this was the case? Not everybody. So Asia crude imports at 12-month high, led by India. Yeah, I mean, don't sleep on India. It's kind of where China was 20, 25 years ago. It won't have the same growth trajectory because obviously China is more of a command control economy. Indian politics is a lot more chaotic. I guess you can call it a democracy, but it's a little bit more chaotic than China. But ultimately, the inertia of 1.4 billion people trying to get wealthier is going to increase oil demand and overall commodity demand in the country as the place gets wealthier. So more uranium porn. South Korea wants to build more nuclear. New government proposal calls for a further 4.9 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2038, in addition to 5.6 gigawatts currently under construction. Korea aims for nuclear to be largest power source. So again, anecdotally, we see this every week. Somebody else building, somebody else increasing, somebody else moving forward, with more nuclear. And that should be telling you something. It's a growth industry. And yes, there will be reactors that age out and get decommissioned. But I think if you pay attention, you see a majority of this growth of new reactors coming from the global East and South, Asia, Middle East, places like that. That's where all the growth is coming from. So my old company here was in the news. Duke Energy signs memorandum of understanding with Microsoft, Google, and Amazon for clean energy. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have signed initial agreements to develop new power contract terms with electric utilities in the U.S. South aimed at lowering the cost of building new nuclear technologies and batteries, Duke Energy said on Wednesday. In memorandums of understanding signed this month, Duke and the world's biggest technology companies propose developing new electricity rate structures, or tariffs, to drive the development of carbon-free technologies such as small modular reactors and long-duration energy storage in North and South Carolina. Now, what's interesting is, I'm going to talk about here in a minute, it seems like the powers, nothing happens in a vacuum, okay? And what you remember is 3, 4, 5 years ago, wind, solar. I mean, when I was at Duke Energy, we were building everything. Duke Energy sold Duke Energy Renewables to Brookfield, I think last year or the year before. Okay. So they divested themselves of that. I think they still have some renewables in their regulated package. I haven't worked there for many years, so I don't know exactly what they have, but I do know working for another company that's under the Brookfield umbrella that they did buy Duke Energy Renewables. And so now you have Duke talking with these major companies that are going to have this data centers and AI, which we know are huge power consumers. And what are they talking about? Nuclear power. Why is everybody in the last week or two so stoked in the US about nuclear power? You had the Biden administration and the Republicans, one of the few things they found common ground on, passing legislation and throwing more money at nuclear power. You had goofball Jennifer Granholm out there at Plant Vogtle, I think this week, talking about we have to build more nuclear. And, where is this all coming from? Well, you're not going to power these data centers and all this AI with this huge power consumption with intermittent power sources. Hello. And so I think in the interim, natural gas is going to be a beneficiary of that. That goes without saying. It's quicker to build and more ubiquitous. But in the end, I think nuclear power ends up being the solution, right? And, this is just making me so ecstatic that the whole zeitgeist has changed around nuclear. I mean, the whole world now gets it on nuclear, and it's just tremendous how the thinking has shifted over the last 3 to 5 years. It's totally flipped 180 degrees. So here's this is from U.S. Global Investors. I like their charts. It says data centers expected to drive U.S. electricity demand between 2022 and 2030. You see the increase in demand is going to be 2.4%. I think this is per year. But you see the major contributor to the growth to electricity demand is going to be data centers. Okay. And again, you're not going to run a data center that needs to be up 24/7, 365 off renewable energy. Okay. It's just not feasible. And so I think that, what you're going to see is, again, this real big push for nuclear, and it's coming from all of the point issues and masters of the universe, which I'm going to point out. So the US has the most data centers of anyone. I mean, it swamps everybody else. I was actually shocked when I saw this, but I don't know how they classify necessarily a data center. But again, think about this. Okay, well, this is just the US, but what about the rest of the world? They're just not going to have data centers. They're not going to have AI. I don't know. Is everybody just going to have, fiber links with the US? So regardless, this is why you can't really make kind of second order thinking here. The US still has a lot of opportunity. They still have a lot of pockets. There's a lot of pockets of nonsense in the country, a lot of your major cities in blue controlled, Dem controlled areas, but there still is a lot of entrepreneurs. There still is a lot of opportunity, and there still is a lot of technology. It's still one of the best places to be an entrepreneur. But I think that's slowly but surely being whittled away. But regardless, I mean, again, what's the rest of the world? Are they going to be building these things? I mean, look at it kind of shocked me about how many more data centers we have in the US than the rest of the world. So here's Mark Nelson, a guy I follow on X. He's like a nuclear guy. He's like I'm not necessarily an investor. He's like more technical nuclear guy. But I put the headline here, and this is what I think has happened. So did the one there, I mean the Dems, did the Dems, big tech donors, tell them to get hot on nuclear power? So I think that's what's happened, right? Because here you have, it says Vogtle, Georgia, U.S. Secretary of Energy calls for hundreds more large nuclear reactors. This is a quote from Jennifer Granholm. She didn't think this up herself. She's a twit. Somebody, put this in front of her. Quote, we need 200 of these by 2050. She's talking about Plant Vogtle-size reactors. 2 down, 98 to go, unquote. I've been advocating for this. I remember I had the 100 in 10 years. We'll build 100,000 megawatt reactors in 10 years and would totally transform this country. Technically, job-wise, industrial base, all of that. And so now it looks like we're heading that way. And it looks like positive fact to me is at least both parties are on board with this. So this is really bullish, not on Monday, not the rest of this year for uranium, but this is just, if this is the direction we're going, then, and everybody's on board with it, forget about it. I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity here. Goes on here, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm speaking now in front of the flawlessly operating Vogtle 3 and 4 nuclear reactors. It's extraordinary that this is what Democrats now sound like on nuclear. It's truly a bipartisan consensus that America needs to build way more nuclear power. Yep. And so where did this come from? Why all of a sudden is everybody on board? Well, here's BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. Quote, the world is going to be short power. And to power these data companies, you cannot have just this intermittent power like wind and solar. You need dispatchable power because you can't turn off and on these data centers, unquote. So the masters of the universe and the tech giants, and these people all contribute to the political class. That's who sent the marching orders out. And so you've got BlackRock, you've got Amazon, you've got Microsoft, you've got Google. That's who calls the tunes because they give the money. And that's why you got Jennifer Granholm out there, saying we need to build 200 Plant Vogtle-size nuclear power plants by 2050. Will that happen? I don't know. Probably not. But definitely we've got really good, fair winds and following seas in our sails if you're a uranium investor. This is positive. And again, this is a total change in attitude towards nuclear power. This didn't exist even 3 years ago. Everybody hated it. The only country in the world that's really kind of like not on the nuclear bandwagon, and it will change, is Germany. Once the political situation there changes, they're going to be back on it. I mean, that's my prediction. And so, again, is this actionable on Monday morning? Not necessarily, but I think that this is it, and barring some type of, there's going to be billions of dollars of federal money flowing into this now because these guys call the shots. Okay. The tech billionaires call the shots. Okay. That's what's going to happen. And it's just, yes, they're going to have to, Plant Vogtle was 7 years late on the build. And I think it was over budget by like 10 or 15 billion dollars, and that can be fixed by streamlining things at the NRC and getting the government to streamline things and to not lower regulations or standards necessarily, but streamline things. Okay, and I think that's going to happen because these people want this AI, they want these data centers, they see the opportunity, they need the power, and so I think that's also going to be an opportunity. I mean, I was a little bit later coming on board with this with the natural gas story, but I think in the interim, in the short term, at least the medium term, this is going to be positive for cogeneration and natural gas because you can throw those things up rather quickly. The problem is we're adding, like, I think by the end of the year, 6 to 9 billion cubic feet a day of export capacity for natural gas. So I think a lot of analysts, I haven't looked at it as deeply as others, but natural gas really looks like it could be an opportunity as, the price of natural gas being substantially lower in the United States and higher overseas. That's why you're seeing this explosion in export of LNG just at a time as Adam Rosenzweig and Lee Gehring have suggested that we may be getting near our peak production of our shale natural gas. So something to keep in mind. Yeah, here's U.S. Energy Secretary calls for more nuclear power while celebrating $35 billion Georgia reactors. And says U.S. Energy Secretary on Friday called for more nuclear reactors to be built in the United States and worldwide. But the CEO of the Georgia utility that just finished the first 2 scratch-built American reactors in a generation at a cost of nearly $35 billion says his company isn't ready to pick up that baton. Speaking in Waynesboro, Georgia, where Georgia Power and 3 other utilities last month put a second new nuclear reactor into commercial operation, Granholm said the United States needs 98 more reactors with the capacity of units 3 and 4 at Plant Vogtle to produce electricity while reducing climate change carbon emissions. Each of the 2 new reactors can power 500,000 homes and businesses without releasing any carbon. So it's going to happen. It'll probably be chaotic. It won't be linear. But again, this is more fuel on the fire. This is more wind in the sails of nuclear power and ultimately uranium. Here's somebody put this together. These are Reuters headlines from the last year or so. Um, Italy sees role for nuclear energy to meet green goals. France's nuclear power boom may curb regional power emissions. Britain to build Europe's first next generation nuclear fuel facility. Japan lifts operational ban on world's biggest nuclear plant. So you see, again, this is just more information and more proof of the fact that the whole world is on board with this. Wanted to point this out. This is from Our World in Data. This is a good site. I kind of go there, all kinds of stuff. This only goes to 2015, but I wanted to point out to the Malthusians, to the end oil people, to the anti-fossil fuel crowd. Says world population, nitrogen, I put up here, nitrogen-based fertilizers, basically natural gas, allow for the ag abundance we enjoy and the population explosion that we've had. It says here in this title to this slide, world population supported by synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And so estimates of the share of global population which could be supported with and without the production of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers via the Haber-Bosch process for food production. Best estimates project that just over half of the global population could be sustained without reactive nitrogen fertilizer derived from the Haber-Bosch process. And so when you have people calling for the end of oil, for the end of fossil fuels, to stop drilling, to stop doing this, they're calling for the death of half the people on the planet. It's just the facts. And so I think a lot of these people are misinformed. They, in their mind, we've talked about the psychology of this whole movement, but that's the bottom line. Okay. And you don't debate with people that want to kill half the people on the earth. You don't debate with them. You shut them down. You ridicule them. You put them in a mayonnaise jar and put the top back on. We don't listen to stupid people. We don't talk to stupid people. Okay. That's what we don't do. And we don't let people like that get any power. And that's my point. If you're an advocate for the ending of oil and natural gas, you're signing the death warrant for half the population. You might be one of them. Don't think that just India and China and Bangladesh will starve to death. It will affect the entire world. It'll affect you. So think about these things. And again, most people don't know what the Haber-Bosch process is. They don't understand how nitrogen-based fertilizers. Drive through corn country and you'll see these tanks that they're dragging around out there during when they're planting, white tanks. They'll have nutrient on there on the side or whatever. These are all the nitrogen-based fertilizers they're placing, the inputs into the soil to help nourish the corn crop. Okay, you see it all over corn country. They're not out there, using vermiculture with worms, and that's not how you do industrial scale agriculture. It's chemically based. We have cotton farming down here in South Texas. I call it chemical farming because it's constantly placing chemicals. I'm not saying it's good or bad. What I'm saying is we have all these people, and if you just want to go and live like hobbits with no nitrogen-based fertilizers, a lot of people are going to die. You could be one of them. Also think this is an opportunity, right? Because I think agriculture is starting to move also prices. I think the fertilizer stocks have really been on the outs for years. It may be something to look at. I've started looking at them. Am I ready to jump into them? No, but they are out of favor right now, and that's what we're attracted to. So here's Siemens will eliminate 4,100 jobs in its renewable wind energy division. Well, what else is new? Higher interest rates put the kibosh on a lot of this stuff. That along with higher commodity prices. And I can tell you that I don't know how things are at Siemens Gamesa now, but when the merger first happened, I was working on putting a wind farm in that was Siemens Gamesa, and it was a total high wire circus act. It was totally it was not professional. Let's put it that way. Maybe they've cleaned it up by now. I don't know. Here's from the article. Siemens Energy is planning to cut 4,100 jobs, or around 15% of its workforce. The unit's chief executive, Jochen Eickholt, said in an internal letter to staff seen by Reuters on Tuesday, quote, "Our current situation demands adjustments that go beyond organizational changes. We have to adapt to lower business volumes, reduced activity in non-core markets, and a streamlined portfolio." I think he went on to say that, regardless, don't worry, we still have, business and all this stuff. But again, I think you're getting, do you want to listen to Jochen Eickholt, or do you want to listen to Larry Fink? Okay, so my view is that, we're past peak ESG as it reflects to renewable energy. It still will have a place. Like, everybody's really pushing this battery storage now. This is a big deal. But again, I think that reaches some type of apex and then, levels out. We're not just going to be putting lithium batteries. The more lithium batteries that you put in, the more fires you're going to have. And, the potential zeitgeist is going to change against that too. So we'll see. Again, predicting the future is hard, right? Okay, this will now be the time. This is going to be a very, very provocative political segment. If you do not like my political views or my interpretations of things, this would be the time for you to leave and go to your fainting couch or go seek some type of other activity, because we're going to talk about the recent situation in New York City. So I titled this slide, we know that the genie is now out of the bottle. I titled this slide that way. Why? Because personally, I've resigned myself to the fact that the United States is in terminal decline. It's an empire in decline. It doesn't match exactly with other empires, but they're all the same. This is what you see. You're not going to vote your way out of it. That's why I always make fun and say vote harder. You're not going to vote your way out. This is set in stone now what's going to happen. You're living history. If you want to know what your future is, or potentially read things like The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, things like that. Read about the Byzantine Empire. Just read about these multicultural empires and how they, fail. And so this is part of it in my view. So here's just some of my talking points. It doesn't, obviously, people have an opinion and view on former President Trump. Okay. I think he's, I don't know the man. He seems to not have a lot of same values that I think are important. He seems to be a narcissist. He seems to be a liar. He lies a lot, but that's what all politicians do. And all politicians are narcissistic to a certain extent. He's a little bit over the top. He says stuff that people don't like, that offends people. But I don't really care about any of that. That doesn't really bother me because, I understand the kind of people that are psychologically attracted to politics, especially high-level politics like the presidency or high-level CEO positions in very big companies. It's a certain type of personality, but I'm not a psychiatrist either. And so people have their view. And so it's a very, very strongly held view. And so, but the problem is this. This is the way I look at it. It says, whatever your political persuasion or personal opinion is, the fact is somewhere around 50% of Americans, give or take, think the Trump conviction is lawfare. As a matter of fact, I think I saw a poll was like 57% of the people thought this was lawfare, or, these charges were brought. They wouldn't have been brought if it was somebody else that wasn't running for. If former President Trump wasn't running for president, would they have brought these charges? No. And people have the view also, I think a lot of people, a majority of people, that the Dems will do anything to try and derail another Trump presidency. I mean, the vitriol and hatred and the progressive, just go look at some of it's amusing. You can't respond to them, but go look at Ilhan Omar's tweets about this. These people are raising a lot of money on this thing, but it's really over the top hyperbole and rhetoric, which is fine. This is what people do in politics, but it's kind of, you know, basically this homophobe and racist finally got what he deserved and justice was served and our democracy saved, all this kind of nonsense. And so, um, you know, I don't look at this emotionally. Some people are getting all worked up about this. Okay, so what? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. It, being a convicted felon doesn't preclude you from being president. I fully suspect they're going to sentence him on July 11th. That's, I think, 4 or 5 days before the Republican convention. I fully expect that they're going to put him in jail. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what that means. They're going. You need to understand something about these progressives. This is something that normal people don't seem to understand about this radical, progressive, neo-Marxist people. They're going all the way. If they could kill this man, they would. If they could hang him, they would. If they could hang you and remove you, they would. Okay? These people play for keeps. That's one thing I will give them. I'm totally opposed to these people, but they play for keeps. Okay? And they fully intend to have him in an orange jumpsuit with a belly chain and leg irons and show that. Okay? That still doesn't preclude him from running for office. I mean, we're in unprecedented times. This is the kind of stuff that you see in third world countries like Bolivia and some of the Myanmar and places like that, where political opponents are jailed or the legal system is used to remove your political opponent. At least it's not as bad as in Mexico, where they're having elections and 30 different candidates have, at different levels have been assassinated. But we haven't got to that point yet. But the problem is that, in my mind, we don't have any civility. We have a country that's completely, basically divided down the middle. It's not going to stand. Okay, that's the problem. And that means the empire doesn't stand, and that means this is a continent, North American continent. That's why this is another brick in the wall of my argument about how the United States won't exist as a political entity within a generation. It's not going to stand because we can't put aside our differences. We can't have. So now we've crossed another Rubicon. Historically, the last Rubicon, the last genie out of the bottle was this ridiculous kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system and using the US dollar and our financial to try to bring down the regime in Russia, because we didn't, like what was going on in Ukraine, even though we were knee deep in it ourselves. And then it didn't work. And so the message is sent to the rest of the world that, the hegemon above all, United States empire, Anglo-American empire, uber alles, everybody gets in line or else. And you can't put that back in the bottle now. And so now they're, running the same playbook out with China and other countries, and people. That's why you see, you just had another country apply to join BRICS this week, Thailand. So you're going to see more of the global East and South band together, and the hegemon is in decline. And this is another one that you can't put in. Go and read about when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and how the Senate was trying to prosecute him and keep him from getting power and what he did. Okay. And you see these parallels, right? And so what did that lead to? Well, it led to a civil war in Rome. Okay. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen here, but what I will tell you is I've already said this, we're already in a civil war. It just it's not hot yet. Okay. And is that conducive to the US being a place for capital to come? It still is to a certain extent, but we're eroding it with this kind of nonsense. Is it really worth it to come up with some convoluted? Even I was reading on MSNBC and CNN websites that legal experts there were saying they got the conviction, but it is kind of convoluted and it has a good chance of not standing on appeal. So what was the point? The point is to throw as much at the wall and, keep Mr. Trump from possibly becoming president again. Okay. And it doesn't matter about the history of the country, the value system, the rule of law. They don't care. All that matters now is raw power. And that's very dangerous. And it looks like now that some people on the right are finally waking up and saying, gee, if this is the game, We can't be all gentlemanly. We got to, so that's what I put here. I said, this can't be undone now. Okay. And like I said, I fully expect that this judge is going to sentence President Trump to prison. That's the intent. Don't kid yourself, and, that's what's going to happen. And so I put here in the third bullet point, Dems and progressives cheering now. I mean, they're ecstatic, they're gleeful, they're full of joy. But remember, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If the other side gets back in power and they start doing the same thing, how are you going to feel about it then? Of course, they're going to be out in the streets rioting, burning the cities down. And then, then what do you do? Put troops on the street, start shooting people down like in 1968 at the Democratic Convention in Chicago? I mean, people don't know history, evidently. So this is dangerous. The whole premise, one of the strengths of the American system, why the economy is strong, why we are such a magnet for capital and for people coming here, not only financial capital, but human capital, is that we have a rule of law. People come here from a lot of countries, entrepreneurs, because in their country, if they're successful, somebody takes it from them or steals it from them or does something. And they know that in the United States, maybe that's changing now, that, if this can be done, if a kangaroo court sham thing like this can be done to a former president, then this can be done to anybody. And that's what a lot of people are looking at. Now, there's going to be people in the comments, you don't understand, everybody needs to be held accountable. Okay, let's hold all the former presidents accountable, though, because they're all criminals, okay, to a certain extent. They all lie, okay? They all have things that they do. I mean, they put, you're going to go back to the point of, are you going to, statutes of limitations on some of the crimes? Are we going to go and then pass special laws for this one case? Because that's what they did with with that gal that supposedly was raped. The statute of limitations, or sexually assaulted, she said she was, or whatever. And they passed a special law in New York just for that time period so that she could prosecute her case. Is that what you really want in this country? Tit for tat, back and forth, escalating political lawfare back and forth? Is that an environment to solve our problems? Is that an environment where, these people that are Mr. Trump supporters, whatever you think of them, okay, they're not like, 1 or 2% of the people. It's, 40 to 50% of the population. And now you're seeing inroads being made into traditional Democratic constituencies like African Americans and Hispanics. People see this for what it is. They have a view or perception that the system is against them and that the laws are used against them. And then they see this happening in President Trump, and that's why they've said it. Listen to the interviews. And so this gleeful thing that the Beltway progressives and intellectual class of the Democratic Party are all happy about need to understand, unless they're going to have a one-party Democratic state here, eventually, at some point, the shoe's going to be on the other foot. Certainly in some of these states, Ken Paxton right here in Texas already issued a memo. That's it. We're going to look at everything now. And so we're going to have we're going to have county prosecutors like Alan, this Bragg guy, bringing federal cases that are going to affect the entire country. This is nonsense. Okay. And so if it isn't stopped immediately, it's just going to blow up. You're going to be like living in Bolivia or Myanmar or one of these whacked out countries, third world countries, where this is the norm, and it's not conducive to capital formation and for sanity. Let's put it that way, and for having a state stability. Instability and unknowns and this kind of nonsense is not conducive to capital formation. So it's a problem. It has something to do with, investing, because the United States becomes less, the shine comes off to a certain extent if this is what we're going to do. So I already, like the fourth point here, politically motivated trials or how third world basket cases operate. And again, is this really positive for the U.S. overall? How do other countries outside that look to the U.S., we're supposed to be the leader of the free world, how do they look at this? Now, I know how it's spun in the media and how the progressives are well, nobody's above the law. Really, dude? Really? You can go and find other articles in where they go through all the other people and all the other minor misdemeanors and stuff that everybody did. Again, you have a certain kind of person that's attracted to this. They're not good people to begin with. That includes Mr. Trump. He doesn't seem to be, the kind of guy that I would want to do business with or be around. He seems to lie a lot. He seems to be a narcissist. He says a lot of crazy things. But, Barack Obama, George Bush Jr., they're all narcissists. Okay. They're all creeps to me. Okay. I said what said what this one mafia guy said in the movie. It was in JFK, one of New Orleans mafia guys. I never met a politician that wasn't a bum. Well, that's kind of how I feel about it. And so what else is new? So this is going to be the new thing now. Okay, back and forth, tit for tat, playing Escalante the whole time. And how do you solve the federal debt that way? How do you solve the border issue that way? How do you solve the inflation and cost of living increases that way that people actually care about? It's not going to be conducive. I mean, you already have people in the Senate and Congress saying they're going to boycott all legislation, stop all judicial appointments. I mean, this is not how government should work. Okay. And so what I'm suggesting to you is this is a pattern. It's not going to change. I'm not optimistic. And that's just why I think that, people say, well, you're being it's hyperbole when you say that we're in a cold civil war that could go hot. We are in a you don't think we're in a civil war? You don't think that, there's two opposing sides here that are diametrically opposed, that hate each other? Where have you been? I mean, the people that are the Trump supporters are livid. I mean, they're boiling hot mad. And, they're not, like I said, it's not 1% of the people you can just gaff up. Who cares about Jill Stein supporters? She's not, has a chance to be president. Mr. Trump does. And then what happens if he does get elected and he's sitting in, Rikers Island? I mean, I don't know how that works out. How does that work? How does the Secret Service protect him if he's in general population? I mean, I don't, there's a lot of, but that's what they want, right? Put them in general population. Somebody will stab them up and they'll be like they did, Dennis Chauvin or Derek Chauvin, that Minneapolis cop that allegedly, snuffed out George Floyd. I mean, he got stabbed up. I mean, that's what they really want. These demons are that's how they think. So I don't know. I don't think you can go back after this. And even if it does get, I think even if it does get reversed on appeal, people are going to remember this and they're not going to be happy. And again, there's some people that are going to be in the comments that are progressives or, hey, everybody should be held accountable to the law, blah, blah, blah. But do you really believe that? Do you really want that? Is that really what you want to see? That's fine, because you're probably going to see that now. Okay. All right. That's it for this week, guys. Again, appreciate the viewership. The channel grows. Again, want to make you aware of the Substack offerings. We have the free weekly newsletter, which is the gateway drug to the paid newsletter. A lot of people get benefit from that. Feel free to sign up for that below. I'm starting to add new t-shirts to the collection, ones that I think are cool. I got a new one up there with a coal miner. I'm going to put more and more like oil and gas and what I think are cool things. So check that out over the next coming weeks as I get more and more designs put up there. And yeah, that's it for this week. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.